He wouldn't even look at me when he said it. That's the part I can't stop replaying. Not the words, not the gasps from the crowd or the smell of ceremonial pine that still makes me gag 5 years later. It's his eyes. The way they fixed on some invisible point above my head, like I was already a ghost, like erasing me had already begun before the sentence left his mouth. I had dressed carefully that morning. Stupid, isn't it? I had stood in front of my cracked mirror in the servants' quarters because that's where the Wolfless girl lived, not in the main house, not where a fated mate should have been welcomed. And I had brushed my hair until it shone. I had pressed my one good gray dress. I had even pinched my cheeks for color, like a girl going to a dance, not to a slaughter. Because I knew. Let me be honest about that. I knew what he was going to do. I'd seen the way Elder Caspian whispered to him after council meetings, the way Lucius's jaw would tighten when he looked at me across the courtyard. I'd heard the servants talking about the Silver Creek Omega, about the Alliance, about how a wolfless Luna was a stain on the Blackwood bloodline. I'd prepared myself. I'd sat on the edge of my cot the night before and told myself, he's going to reject you tomorrow, Diana. Don't cry, don't beg, just stand there and take it, and then walk away with whatever is left of you. I was ready for the rejection. I was not ready for the cruelty. I was not ready for him to hold her hand while he did it, to turn to her first, not to me, as if announcing good news at a celebration. I was not ready for Elder Caspian's smile, that thin, satisfied smile of a man whose chess piece had landed exactly where he wanted it. I was not ready for Marin, the she-wolf who shared my corridor, to lean to her friend and mouth the word, finally. And I was not ready for the silence. The complete, ringing absence of anyone stepping forward to say this was wrong. That silence taught me more than Lucius's words ever did. It taught me that a fated bond means nothing when the world has already decided what you're worth. It taught me that the moon goddess's design is just a suggestion to people with power, something to honor when it's convenient and discard when it isn't. It taught me that I had spent my whole life apologizing for a condition I did not choose, could not control, and that the apology itself was the crime. I had bowed my head and accepted their framing. Wolfless means broken. Wolfless means less. And in doing so, I had given them permission to throw me away. I think about that girl sometimes. The one who pinched her cheeks and brushed her hair and walked to her own execution with hope still flickering in her stupid, trusting heart. I don't hate her. I mourn her. She died that day in the Great Hall, and from her bones, I built something Lucius Blackwell never imagined possible. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it happened. All of it. The breaking, the burning, the becoming. Part 1. The breaking. The great hall of the Blackwood Pack smelled of pine resin and sweat. Ceremonial wreaths hung from the iron chandeliers, their needles already browning at the tips. 200 wolves stood shoulder to shoulder in the tiered gallery, their breath fogging in the cool morning air. The stone floor had been swept clean, the ancestral banners rehung, the throne polished to a dark gleam. It was a stage. Diana Voss understood that now, standing at its center. She stood to the right of the dais, in the position traditionally reserved for the fated mate during a bonding declaration. On the left stood Lyra of the Silver Creek Pack, pale, slender, her wheat-colored hair arranged in an elaborate cascade, her wrists stacked with silver bracelets that clinked faintly when she breathed. She smelled of lavender and something sweeter, manufactured, a scent designed to soothe, an Omega's perfume. Diana smelled of rain on dry earth. It was not a scent she had chosen or cultivated, it simply was, like her brown hair, like her plain face, like the hollow, wolfless silence where a second soul should have lived inside her chest. Alpha King Lucius Blackwell stood on the dais above them both. He was 26, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with a jaw that could have been carved from the same granite as the castle walls. His eyes were the color of a winter storm, gray, restless, charged. Every unmated she-wolf in the territory had imagined those eyes softening for her. Diana had not needed to imagine. She had felt those eyes lock onto hers 3 weeks ago in the courtyard and felt the world rearrange itself around the axis of that gaze. The bond had struck like a physical blow, a hook behind her sternum, pulling her toward him with a force that made her stumble. She had seen the same shock in his face, the dilation of his pupils, the involuntary step forward. His wolf had surged to the surface so violently that his eyes had flickered gold for a full 3 seconds before he'd blinked, turned away, and walked in the opposite direction without a word. 3 weeks. He had avoided her for 3 weeks. No acknowledgement, no meeting, no explanation. Just the growing whisper campaign from Elder Caspian's faction and the sudden accelerated arrival of the Silver Creek delegation with Lyra in tow. Diana had understood. She was not stupid. She was wolfless, not brainless, though the pack seemed unable to distinguish between the two. Now Lucius was speaking, and his eyes were aimed at the back wall of the great hall, 6 inches above her head. I have made my decision. His voice carried the weight of the Alpha command, a subsonic vibration that pressed against the diaphragm like a hand. Several younger wolves dropped their gazes involuntarily. For the prosperity and security of the Blackwood pack, and for the continuation of a strong bloodline. Bloodline. There it was. The word they had been circling for weeks, the word that meant her. Defective bloodline. Wolfless bloodline. The bloodline that could produce heirs without wolves. Heirs who would weaken the Blackwell line for generations. Elder Caspian had presented the genetic argument to the council with charts, she'd been told. Charts. As if she were a breeding mare whose pedigree had come back wanting. I accept the alliance offered by the Silver Creek pack. He turned to Lyra, reaching for her hand. Lyra's bracelets chimed, a tiny sound. Diana would hear that chime in her nightmares for years. I choose Lyra as my Luna. The silence that followed was enormous. It was not the silence of shock alone. It was the silence of 200 people holding their breath to see what the rejected girl would do. Would she scream? Would she collapse? They had all heard the stories. A severed mate bond was supposed to be agony, a psychic wound that could drive wolves mad. The gallery was braced for spectacle. Diana felt the words hit her in waves. The first wave was numbness, a novocaine spreading through her nervous system, mercifully blunting the impact. The second wave, a half-second later, was physical. Her knees went soft, the world tilted. She reached for something to steady herself. There was nothing. Her hand closed on empty air at her side, and she saw Marin, standing 3 rows back, notice the gesture and whisper something behind her hand. Laughter. Quiet, but real. Diana locked her knees. She forced her spine straight. The third wave was the worst. Not pain yet, but the dawning comprehension of what was happening to her, and who was watching it happen. Every face in the gallery was turned toward her. Some held pity. Some held satisfaction. Elder Caspian, white-bearded and imperious in his council robes, watched her the way a surgeon watches an incision. Clinical, detached, already thinking about the next step. He had argued for this. He had orchestrated it. And Lucius had let him. She looked at Lucius then, forced herself to look at the man whose soul was supposed to be tethered to hers by divine design. He still wasn't looking at her. His jaw was clenched, a muscle jumping beneath the skin. His hand, wrapped around Lyra's small, cold fingers, was white-knuckled. He was in pain, she realized. The bond was punishing him, too. But he was enduring it. He had decided that she was a price worth paying. Something cracked inside Diana then. Not the bond, that came later. Something older, more foundational. The part of her that had spent 21 years apologizing for existing. The part that had accepted the label wolfless, as if it were a synonym for less than. The part that had thought, if I am good enough, quiet enough, useful enough, they will see past it. They would never see past it. They had never intended to. She became aware of a strange calm settling over her, like the stillness before a storm breaks. The pity in the crowd was worse than the cruelty. The pity assumed she was destroyed, that this was the defining catastrophe of her life, that she would now crawl away and lick her wounds in some dark corner until she faded from memory. The pity already had her buried. She was not going to give them that. Diana lifted her chin. She looked past Lucius, past Lyra, past the elders and the sneering she-wolves and the guards who had already shifted their weight to intercept her if she lunged. She looked at the great doors of the hall, standing open to the twilight beyond, and she saw the road that led out of Blackwood territory and into the wild. Then she looked at Lucius one final time. Their eyes met. She saw the flinch, tiny, involuntary, the barest crack in his composure. He was bracing himself. He expected her to beg. He expected her to fall apart. He had probably rehearsed his response. Something firm but merciful, the benevolent king letting down the unfortunate girl gently. She smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was not a brave smile. It was the smile of a woman who had just understood something fundamental about the man in front of her, something he did not yet understand about himself. It was a smile that said, "You have no idea what you've just done." "Good luck," she said. 2 words. She had to force them past the knot in her throat, and the effort nearly broke her. If she had tried to say a single word more, the scream building behind her teeth would have escaped, and she would not give them that. She turned and walked. Not quickly, not slowly. A measured, deliberate pace, her worn shoes soundless on the stone floor. Past the stunned guards, past the gaping pack members, past the threshold and into the purple twilight. She made it 200 yards down the road before the bond snapped. It was like being struck by lightning from the inside. A searing, white-hot wire of agony that ripped through her chest, her stomach, her skull. She dropped to her knees in the dirt, her vision going white, a sound tearing from her throat that she didn't recognize as her own. Her hands clawed at the earth, fingernails splitting, her body trying to crawl back toward the source of the bond, even as her mind screamed at it to stop. The phantom hook behind her sternum was being ripped out, and it was taking pieces of her with it. She vomited. She gasped. She pressed her forehead to the cold ground and shook until the worst of it passed, leaving behind a raw, gaping wound in the center of her chest that pulsed with each heartbeat. No one came after her. She knelt in the dirt for a long time, trembling, waiting. The road behind her remained empty. No footsteps, no voice calling her name, no wolf howling in pursuit. The great Blackwood pack had discarded her, and the machine of its existence had simply continued humming without a single gear displaced. When she finally stood, her legs were shaking and her dress was torn at the knees. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and looked at the road ahead. It stretched into the dark tree line, into the wilderness where rogues and worse things lived. She was wolfless. She had no weapons, no supplies, no destination. Every survival instinct she possessed was screaming at her to turn around, to go back, to accept whatever scraps of existence they'd allow her. She started walking into the dark. Back in the great hall, Lucius Blackwell stood with Lyra's hand in his and felt the bond sever. The pain drove a spike of ice through his skull. His wolf, which had been clawing, howling, throwing itself against the walls of his control since the moment he'd opened his mouth, let out a sound he had never heard from it before. Not a howl, not a growl, a keen, a high, thin, grieving note, like a mother calling for a dead pup. Then silence. His wolf withdrew into the deepest chamber of his mind and went still. It did not snarl. It did not pace. It simply lay down and stopped responding. For the first time since he'd shifted at 13, Lucius was alone inside his own head. He stood straighter, squeezed Lyra's hand, smiled for his people. The celebration began. Wine was poured, toasts were made. Elder Caspian clapped him on the shoulder and told him he'd done the hard thing, the right thing, the kingly thing. The Silver Creek delegation looked pleased. Lyra smiled shyly and smelled of lavender. Lucius smiled back and felt nothing. He told himself that was the price of leadership. He told himself the hollow feeling in his chest was duty, not damage. He told himself he had made the rational choice, the strategic choice, the choice that would secure his people's future. He told himself a lot of things that night. None of them were true. Part 2. The Burning. For the first 3 days, Diana kept stopping. She would walk for an hour, 2 hours, deeper into the northern wilderness where the pines grew close and the undergrowth swallowed the trail. Then she would sit on a fallen log or lean against a boulder and stare back the way she had come. She wasn't waiting for Lucius. She told herself she wasn't waiting for Lucius. But some pathetic, broken-hinged part of her kept expecting to hear footsteps. A patrol, maybe. Marcus, his beta, sent to retrieve her. Some acknowledgement that the fated mate of the Alpha King had walked into the wilderness and someone, anyone, should perhaps check whether she was alive. By the 4th day, the waiting stopped. Not because hope died a gentle death, but because hunger and cold killed it efficiently. She had eaten nothing since the ceremony. The November nights were brutal, and her gray dress was not made for sleeping on open ground. She woke on the 4th morning with frost on her eyelashes and a clarity born of pure physical misery. No one was coming. No one had ever been going to come. She was a problem that had solved itself by walking away, and the Blackwood pack was relieved to be rid of her. The anger arrived on the 7th day. She was crouching by a stream, trying to catch a fish with her bare hands, failing for the 20th time, her fingers numb and clumsy in the freezing water. And a thought arrived, uninvited and scalding. I am starving because of his decision, not because of fate, not because of the moon goddess, because a man looked at her and decided she was not worth the inconvenience, because a council of old men drew charts about her womb, because an entire pack, hundreds of wolves who had watched her grow up among them, had sat in that gallery and said nothing. She had been so focused on the rejection itself, on Lucius's words, on the snap of the bond, on her own composure, that she had not yet examined the architecture beneath it. Now, shivering and starving, she did. And what she found was not a single betrayal, but a system. A hierarchy that classified wolves by power and treated the classification as moral worth. Wolfless meant weak. Weak meant dispensable. Dispensable meant you could be thrown away at the convenience of the strong, and the strong would sleep soundly because they had convinced themselves it was necessary. It was not necessary. It was never necessary. It was comfortable. She stood up from the stream, fish forgotten, her whole body vibrating with a rage so pure and clean it felt like a second heartbeat. She was not angry at Lucius alone. She was angry at every elder who had whispered, every she-wolf who had sneered, every system that had taught her, from the day she failed to shift at puberty, that she was less, that she should be grateful for tolerance, that she should make herself small and useful and hope the powerful would let her exist in their shadow. She was done being small. The rage was the first thing that kept her alive. Not food, not shelter. Rage. She walked faster. She stopped looking back. She began to fantasize, not about Lucius loving her, not anymore, but about returning, walking back into that hall with the power to make the stone itself tremble. She imagined Elder Caspian's face, Marin's face, Lucius's face. She imagined them on their knees, and the image warmed her more than any fire could. She knew it was fantasy. She was a wolfless girl alone in the wilderness, with no skills, no supplies, and no allies. She would likely die before the winter was out. But the fantasy gave her legs the will to keep moving forward instead of lying down in the snow. And for now, that was enough. On the 19th night, the storm found her. She had been sheltering in a shallow cave at the base of a granite cliff, the kind of space that was too small for a bear and too exposed for real warmth. The storm came from the west, a wall of black cloud that swallowed the stars and hit the mountain with a violence that shook loose stone from the cave ceiling. Rain became sleet, became ice. The wind screamed through the cave mouth like a living thing. Diana pressed herself against the back wall, her teeth chattering so violently she couldn't unclench her jaw. She was running a fever. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her feet were blistered and infected, her dress reduced to rags. She had walked until her body could walk no further, and the wilderness was about to claim her. And in the howling dark, a thought surfaced that she had been pushing down for 19 days. Why was I wolfless? Not the mechanical answer, the hormone levels, the failed shift, the pitying diagnosis from the pack healer. The real question, the theological one. If the moon goddess designed fated mates, if the bond was sacred and inviolable, then the same goddess had also made Diana wolfless. The same divine hand that had tethered her soul to Lucius had also ensured she would be seen as unworthy of him. It was a paradox, a cruelty. Either the goddess was incompetent, or Diana's wolflessness served a purpose she could not yet see. She laughed. It came out as a croak, then a sob, then something between the two. She laughed at the absurdity of lying in a cave, dying and doing theology. She laughed at the girl who had pinched her cheeks. She laughed at Lucius's charts and Elder Caspian's satisfied smile and the entire, stupid, self-important machinery of pack politics that had ground her up and spat her out. The laughter turned to screaming. Not a scream of fear, a scream of fury, of refusal. She screamed at the storm, at the goddess, at the invisible chains of a system that had told her she was nothing. And she had believed it, and that was the part she could not forgive. Then her bones caught fire. The pain was beyond anything the broken bond had done to her. It started in her spine and radiated outward, a white-hot fracturing that felt like every cell in her body was being taken apart and reassembled. She heard cracking, wet, organic sounds that she realized were her own bones reshaping. Her fingers lengthened, then curled. Her spine arched, her jaw stretched, and she tasted blood as her teeth sharpened into points. She tried to scream again, but what came out was a howl, deep, resonant, and devastating. It shook the cave. It silenced the storm. It rolled across the mountains like thunder, and miles away, wolves in their dens lifted their heads, ears flat, hackles raised, responding to a frequency they had never heard and instinctively feared. When the transformation ended, Diana Voss stood on 4 legs for the first time in her life. She was enormous. Her fur was the color of liquid moonlight, silver white, luminous in the dark cave as if lit from within. Her eyes blazed with a cold, ancient silver fire. She could feel the storm now not as a threat, but as a conversation. The electricity in the air hummed against her fur. The rain sang against the stone. The earth beneath her paws thrummed with a deep, living pulse she had never sensed before. She was not merely a wolf. She was something older, something the packs had relegated to myth and bedtime stories. A lichen. A descendant of the first pack, the original wolves blessed by the moon goddess herself. A bloodline of such power that it had been hunted, feared, driven to extinction centuries ago. Or so the world believed. Her wolflessness had never been an absence. It had been a containment. Power this vast could not emerge gently, could not trickle in during a comfortable puberty surrounded by packmates. It required a crucible. It required the shattering of everything she was, so that everything she was meant to be could finally, violently, be born. Diana threw back her great silver head and howled again. This time, it was not agony. It was introduction. The mountains heard, and the mountains answered. She found Ron 2 weeks later, or rather, he found her. She had been hunting in wolf form. The mechanics came to her with eerie, instinctive ease, as if her body had always known and had simply been waiting for permission. She had just brought down a deer, her first clean kill, when the scent of another wolf hit her. Male. Alpha. Close. He came through the trees like a landslide, massive, dark-furred, covered in scars that mapped a history of violence. His left ear was half torn. A long, raised scar split his muzzle diagonally. His golden eyes were hard, calculating, and utterly without fear. He was a rogue alpha, and this was his territory, and she was trespassing. He growled, low, rumbling, a sound that demanded submission. Diana's wolf did not submit. Her wolf looked at this scarred, angry male and felt something new. Not the magnetic, compulsive pull of a mate bond, but a cooler, more practical recognition. Here was strength. Here was someone the world had also thrown away. She growled back, and the sound that came from her throat made the trees shudder. He lunged. She put him on his back in under 3 seconds. It was not a fight. It was a statement. She pinned him with one massive silver paw, her jaws an inch from his throat, her eyes blazing with the terrible ancient light of her bloodline. He went limp beneath her, not in defeat, but in shock. His golden eyes were wide, fixed on hers with an expression she would come to know well in the years ahead. The stunned disbelief of a creature recognizing that it has just encountered something it thought was myth. She let him up. He shifted to human form, tall, dark-skinned, built like a siege engine, his body a topographic map of scars. He stared at her for a long time. "What are you?" he asked. Not who. What? She shifted back. It was the first time she had resumed human form since the cave, and the cold hit her like a slap. She stood before him, naked and shivering, a small, brown-haired woman who looked nothing like the enormous silver predator that had just pinned him to the forest floor. "Hungry," she said, "and I believe that's my deer." His name was Ron. He had been the beta of the Grey March pack until he'd challenged their alpha over a systematic campaign of abuse against Omegas in the pack. He'd lost the challenge, barely, and been cast out, the word Oathbreaker branded into his reputation. He'd been rogue for 3 years, surviving alone, trusting no one. He shared the deer. She shared the cave. They did not trust each other, but they had an understanding born of mutual recognition. The world had decided they were disposable, and they had both declined the diagnosis. It was Ron who found the others. The first group was a mother and 2 pups hiding in a ravine 7 miles east. The mother was an Omega whose mate had been killed in a territory dispute. The ruling alpha had claimed her as property, a spoil of war, and when she'd fought back, she'd been driven out with nothing. The pups were 3 and 5. They were eating bark. Diana brought them to the cave. She gave them the best sleeping spot nearest the fire. She hunted for them while the mother recovered her strength, and something settled in her chest that had been formless until that moment. Purpose. 3 became 7, 7 became 12. Word traveled the way it does among rogues, in whispers, in scent markers, in the cautious approach of a lone wolf at the edge of the firelight. They came broken, scarred, missing ears, missing fingers, missing the will to go on. Omegas sold by their packs, betas cast out for dissent, alphas defeated in rigged challenges, the discarded, the unwanted, the unclaimed. Diana took them all. The early months were ugly and practical. There was no grand strategy, no empire building. There was firewood and clean water, and the question of how to feed 23 mouths when winter was closing in. Diana negotiated their first alliance not with a wolf pack, but with a human farming village called Keswick, 30 miles south. The village was being terrorized by a feral rogue pack, 4 wolves, mad with isolation, raiding livestock at night. Diana and Ron killed them in a single efficient action. In return, Keswick gave them grain, salt, and the use of an abandoned mill on the river. The mill became their first permanent shelter. Diana set rules immediately. No dominance displays within the group. No hierarchies based on designation. Omegas ate at the same time as alphas. Disputes were settled by mediation, not combat. Anyone who harmed a pup, for any reason, was exiled. Ron enforced the rules. He did not understand all of them. He was an alpha to his bones, and the instinct to dominate was a constant itch. But he understood Diana. He understood that she was building something that had never existed before, a pack that did not run on fear. 23 became 50 when Diana defeated Harsk, a feral alpha who controlled a stretch of river territory through pure brutality. She challenged him in front of his own people, 30 starving, terrified wolves who had been too afraid to leave. Harsk was strong, experienced, vicious. Diana was faster. She broke his jaw in 4 moves and gave his people a choice. Join her under her rules or leave in peace. Every single one of them stayed. 50 became 200, then 500. Each absorption followed the same pattern. Diana identified a broken or abusive pack, challenged its leadership, and offered the survivors something they had never been offered before: agency, the right to choose, the right to stay or go, to speak or remain silent, to be Omega or Alpha or anything in between without that designation determining their worth. She made mistakes. In the second year, she trusted a lieutenant named Graves who turned out to be embezzling supplies and running a black market on the side. She discovered it when 2 pups nearly died from tainted food. She exiled him, and that night she sat alone outside the mill and shook for an hour. Not with anger, but with the weight of responsibility. These people trusted her. Their children were eating what she provided. A mistake on her part was not a political setback. It was a child choking on poison. She was more careful after that. She built a council of 7, Ron as her beta, and 6 others chosen not for strength but for judgment. She wrote laws, actual written laws, on paper, codified and posted in every settlement. Property rights, asylum procedures, protocols for integrating new arrivals, a justice system that didn't rely on whoever could hit the hardest. She called them the unclaimed. Not rogues, not outcasts. Unclaimed. The word was deliberate. It said, we were not lost. We were not thrown away. We simply have not yet been claimed by a world worthy of us. And until that world exists, we will build our own. By the 3rd year, the unclaimed controlled a territory larger than any single wolf pack in the known lands. By the 4th, they had a standing army of 800 trained warriors, a network of farming settlements, trade agreements with human towns, and a capital built in the ruins of an old fortress that Diana renamed Ashfield, because everything she had began in ashes. Somewhere in the middle of all of it, without ceremony or announcement, the unclaimed stopped calling Diana their leader and started calling her their queen. It was in the 3rd year that the mate bond nearly destroyed everything she had built. She was in a war council, reviewing patrol routes along the eastern border. A trader had passed through that morning, his cart loaded with goods from Blackwood territory. He smelled of pine resin, ceremonial pine, the kind they burned in the Great Hall for formal occasions. The scent hit Diana without warning. Her wolf, the magnificent silver beast that had become the core of her power, lunged. Not outward, inward. It surged toward the phantom ache of the broken bond with a desperate, keening whine that buckled Diana's knees. She grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her breath hitching. 6 commanders stared at her. My queen? Ron was on his feet instantly, his hand on her arm. Excuse me, she said, and her voice was steady, which was a miracle. A moment. She walked out of the council chamber, down the corridor, into her private quarters. She closed the door. She locked it. And then she slid down the wall and sat on the floor, shaking with a fury that had nowhere to go. Even now it pulls. 3 years. 3 years of building, of fighting, of becoming something no one had thought possible. 3 years of discipline and duty and iron will. And 1 whiff of pine resin could reduce her to the girl in the gray dress, reaching for a hand that wasn't there. Her wolf paced inside her, whining. Mate, he is out there. We could find him. We could. He threw us away. The wolf whimpered. The bond is sacred. The goddess made us for each other. The goddess also made me wolfless. The goddess also let me walk into the wilderness alone. If the bond is a leash, I refuse to wear it. If the bond is a gift, it was given to a man who returned it unopened. I will not go back for someone who has to lose everything before he sees what was standing in front of him all along. She sat on the floor until the shaking stopped. Then she stood, washed her face, and walked back into the war council. She finished the patrol review. She approved a new trade route. She signed 3 land charters. She did not mention the pine resin. She did not mention it to anyone, ever. But that night, alone in her chamber, she allowed herself one indulgence. She pressed her palm flat against her chest, over the place where the bond had once lived. and she asked the question that had no answer. Did you ever feel this? Even once? Or was I always just a problem to be solved? The silence that answered was its own kind of verdict. Part 3. The Reckoning. 5 years after the rejection, the Voss Empire's borders reached the southern edge of Blackwood territory. Diana had not planned it this way, or rather, she had not admitted to planning it this way. The expansion had followed a logical path, absorbing rogue territories, securing trade routes, pushing toward fertile land. That the logical path led directly to Lucius Blackwell's doorstep was either fate or her subconscious, and she chose not to examine which. The intelligence reports from Blackwood told a story she had expected but found no satisfaction in. The alliance with Silver Creek had collapsed within 2 years. The resources they'd promised had dwindled to a trickle, then stopped altogether. The pack was starving. The birth rate had plummeted. The warriors were listless, their training deteriorating. Lucius's wolf, according to her spies, had gone silent on the day of the rejection and never returned. He could still shift, still command, but the primal fire that made an alpha magnetic, the force that bound a pack to its leader, was gone. He had chosen a Luna without a bond, and the land itself was reflecting that sterile, broken union. The crops thinned, the soil soured. The pack, without the psychic resonance of a true mated pair at its center, was slowly losing its collective will to thrive. It was not a punishment from the goddess. It was simply physics. A pack needed a bonded pair, the way a body needed a beating heart. Lucius had ripped his own heart out and replaced it with a political arrangement. And the body was dying. Diana received the reports in her study at Ashfield, read them carefully, and felt nothing. Or rather, she felt so many things simultaneously: vindication, grief, anger, pity, that they canceled each other out into a numb, professional composure. She was a queen. This was an acquisition. She would absorb Blackwood, feed its people, integrate its warriors, and move on. She did not think about the man. She absolutely did not think about the man. The army of the Voss Empire appeared on the hills south of Blackwood Castle on a gray October morning. 3,000 strong. They moved in perfect, silent ranks, their black and silver banners snapping in the wind, their discipline a stark contrast to the feral reputation of the rogues they had once been. They did not howl, they did not posture. They simply arrived, an inevitability made flesh. At their head, mounted on a black war horse, rode Queen Diana of the Voss Empire. Her silver armor was functional, unadorned except for a wolf's head etched into the breastplate. A silver circlet rested on her brow. Her dark hair, now threaded with natural silver streaks, was braided back in a warrior's plait. She wore no helmet. She wanted to be seen. Ron rode beside her, his scarred face impassive, his hand resting on the pommel of the massive sword strapped across his back. He had not left her side in 5 years. He would not leave it now. On the castle battlements, a man stood watching them come. Lucius Blackwell had aged a decade in 5 years. The arrogant, commanding young king was gone. In his place stood a hollow-eyed man with gray at his temples and lines carved deep around his mouth. He gripped the stone parapet until his knuckles blanched. He felt her before he saw her clearly, a wave of power, immense and ancient, rolling ahead of the army like a pressure front. It pressed against his chest, his throat, demanding submission from every cell in his body. And woven through it, a scent, faint on the wind. Rain on dry earth, threaded now with the ozone crackle of an alpha's power. His wolf, silent for 5 years, stirred. It did not roar, it did not howl. It lifted its head in the dark chamber where it had lain grieving, and it whimpered. A single, broken sound of recognition. Mate. Lucius's legs nearly gave out. The parley was brief and devastating. Lucius and his beta, Marcus, walked out through the main gate, unarmed. They stopped 20 paces from the mounted queen. Up close, the transformation was staggering. The soft, quiet girl was gone entirely. In her place sat a woman whose every line communicated authority. The set of her jaw, the stillness of her hands on the reins, the steady, predatory focus of her gaze. A thin white scar traced above her left eyebrow. Her eyes held an ancient silver light that flickered at the edges. She looked at Lucius the way a general looks at a map. "You are trespassing on the lands of the Blackwood Pack," Lucius managed. The words sounded absurd even to him. Diana's lips twitched. Not the chilling smile of his memory, something almost worse. Faint amusement, as if he were a mildly interesting footnote. "Your claim to these lands is expiring, Lucius," she said. No title, just his name, a deliberate demotion. "I am Queen Diana of the Voss Empire. I am here to offer your people a future you have failed to provide." "You lead rogues," he said, grasping for anything. "They are the unclaimed," she corrected, her voice cool and precise. "The discarded, the rejected. Every one of them was thrown away by someone who looked like you. I gave them what no pack would. A home they didn't have to earn by being born the right kind of wolf." The blow landed. He felt it in his sternum. "My terms are simple," she continued. "Surrender your territory and title. Your people will be absorbed into the Voss Empire. They will be fed, housed, and given full citizenship. No one will be harmed." A pause. "You will renounce your crown and swear fealty to me." Lucius stared at her. This wasn't negotiation. It was notification. And the worst part, the part that cut deepest, was the absence of anger in her voice. No revenge, no passion. Just the measured efficiency of a queen acquiring a failed state. To her, he was not the man who broke her heart. He was a line item. "And if I refuse?" Her gaze hardened, and for one instant the full weight of her power pressed down on him, an atmospheric force that drove the air from his lungs and made Marcus stagger. "Then your pack will still be absorbed," she said, "but you will not be. Do not mistake my offer of peace for softness, Lucius. I did not build an empire by being sentimental. You have until sundown." She turned her horse. Ron fell in beside her. They rode back toward the army without looking back. Lucius stood in the empty field and felt the world collapse around him. His wolf was keening again, a sound of pure, hopeless anguish. "She does not want us. We are nothing. Nothing." He turned to Marcus. His beta's face was ash gray. "We cannot fight that," Marcus said quietly. "Look at them. They would die for her. Our people, they're starving, Lucius. Half the warriors haven't eaten a full meal in a week." "I have to talk to her," Lucius said, alone. "Not about territory, about the bond." Marcus's voice was gentle and brutal at once. "It's been 5 years. What are you going to say that matters now?" "I don't know, but if I don't try, I will live with that silence for the rest of my life." He went at dusk. He left his crown, his sword, his formal tunic. He walked across the field in common clothes, a man going to his mate with nothing but the wreckage of his pride. Ron met him at the perimeter. The massive beta looked Lucius up and down with open contempt. The Alpha King, crawling on his belly. "I'm not here as a king. I'm here to see Diana." "You lost the right to say that name 5 years ago." "Please." The word cost him everything. Ron studied him for a long moment. He saw the desperation. He felt the discordant thrum of the mate bond hanging in the air like a wounded animal. He thought of his queen, of the shadow he sometimes saw cross her face when she thought no one was watching, the way she pressed her hand to her chest during storms. He jerked his head toward the command tent. "She decides, and if you cause her one more moment of pain, I will rip your throat out." Lucius walked through the camp. He saw pups playing, families eating around cookfires, warriors laughing, sharpening weapons, mending gear. The smell of roasting meat and fresh bread. It was everything his pack was not, everything he had failed to provide. He reached the command tent. He could feel her inside, a calm, dense center of power, like standing next to a deep lake. Her scent washed over him, and his wolf went quiet in a way it hadn't been in 5 years. Not peaceful, reverent. He pushed through the flap. Diana stood over a table spread with maps. She had removed her armor. In a dark gray tunic, with her silver-streaked hair unbound, she looked less like a conqueror and more like the woman his memory had been torturing him with for 5 years. But the power radiating from her was unchanged, enormous, rooted, ancient. She looked up. No surprise, just a weary resignation, as if she'd known he would come and had been dreading it. "Ron should not have let you in," she said. "Diana." His voice cracked on her name. "Please. I know I have no right to be here. I know what I did, but I need you to hear me. There is nothing left to hear." "There is everything," the words broke from him. "I was a coward, not a king making a hard choice, a coward. The bond terrified me. When I was near you, my wolf went feral. I couldn't control it, couldn't think, couldn't command. And that scared me more than Silver Creek's armies, more than empty storehouses, more than any of it. Lyra was safe. Lyra was manageable. Lyra didn't make me feel like I was standing at the edge of a cliff about to fall." He was pacing now, the confession pouring out of him like an arterial bleed. "The council gave me the excuse I needed. Wolfless meant weak. Wolfless meant political risk. Wolfless meant the bloodline would suffer. And I grabbed that excuse with both hands because it was easier than admitting that I was afraid of what you made me feel." He stopped, looked at her. His eyes were raw, red-rimmed, stripped of every pretense. "I didn't reject you because you were weak, Diana. I rejected you because the bond told me you were everything, and I wasn't brave enough to believe it." Silence filled the tent. Diana stood motionless, her face a mask of stone. Inside, her wolf was pacing, whining, straining toward the sound of his voice. Her chest ached. The phantom wound of the bond throbbed with renewed, vicious life. She had imagined this conversation 1,000 times. In the early years, she had imagined it with fury, screaming at him, making him feel one fraction of what she had felt. In the later years, she had imagined it with ice, cool, detached, a queen tolerating a petitioner. She had not imagined it would feel like this, a deep, tired sadness, like looking at the ruins of a house that had burned down years ago. The fire was out. The ashes were cold. There was nothing left to rage at, only the empty foundations of what might have been. He took a step closer. His hand trembled as it reached toward her face. "Let me fix this," he whispered. "I'll stand before your pack, my pack, the entire world. I'll declare you my Luna, my queen, my everything. Just give me a second chance. Give us." Her hand shot up and caught his wrist. The strength behind her grip made his eyes widen. His alpha power was nothing against hers. She held his wrist between them, a barrier, a boundary, a line he would not cross. "A second chance," she repeated. Her voice was quiet, but the temperature in the tent dropped. "You say that as if it's something you're owed. As if the bond is a reset button you can press now that you're losing." She released his wrist, pushed him back a step. "For 5 years, Lucius. 5 years I was alone. I walked until my feet bled. I starved. I nearly froze to death in a cave while my bones broke themselves apart and reformed into something you cannot fathom. I built an empire, not with destiny, not with prophecy, with my hands. With every rogue I saved, and every law I wrote, and every night I sat awake because the people who trusted me needed me to get it right." She took a step toward him. He retreated. The reversal was complete. "You didn't just reject me, Lucius. You confirmed every lie I had been told about myself since the day I failed to shift. You stood in front of 200 people and told the world that the moon goddess was wrong about me. And I believed you." Her voice fractured, just barely, on the last 3 words. She sealed the crack instantly. "I believed you, and it almost killed me." He was ashen. She could see him crumbling, and a small, treacherous part of her wanted to stop, wanted to gather the wreckage of him and say, "It's okay. I understand. We can try." She killed that impulse. She had killed it 100 times. She was practiced at it now. "You stand here and beg me to be your Luna," she said, her voice rising, not in anger, but in the crescendo of a truth she had been carrying for 5 years and could finally set down. "You say you need me. You're right, you do. But you don't need me. You need my power. You need my army. You need the thing I became because you broke me, and you want to claim it as if you had any part in building it." She stopped, stood straight. The silver fire in her eyes was steady, unwavering. "You were right about one thing, Lucius. You needed a powerful Luna." Her voice dropped. Each word was a stone laid on the grave of what they might have been. "So I went out and became a queen." The silence that followed was absolute. "You just weren't the king worthy of standing beside me." It was not cruelty. It was not revenge. It was a verdict, delivered with the cold, impartial finality of a woman who had examined the evidence, weighed it fairly, and reached a conclusion she wished were different. She watched it land. She watched the last ember of hope die in his eyes, watched his face go slack with the specific devastation of a man who knows, with complete certainty, that the judgment is true. He stared at her. Then something in his posture broke. Not dramatically, not a collapse, just a small, final settling, like a building whose foundations have given way. His shoulders dropped, his eyes went dull. He understood. He turned and walked out of the tent without another word. Diana stood alone in the silence. She listened to his footsteps fade. She pressed her palm to her chest, over the old wound, and felt it throb. Her wolf keened softly. She closed her eyes. She breathed. Then she turned back to her maps. Part 4. The Becoming. The sun rose over the hills the next morning, thin and gold, as if the world were trying on hope for the first time in years. The army of the Voss Empire stood in perfect, silent formation. On the castle walls, the people of the Blackwood Pack gathered, their faces drawn with fear and hunger, and the specific exhaustion of people who have been slowly dying and have run out of the energy to pretend otherwise. The gates opened. A single figure walked out, carrying a white banner. Lucius had not slept. He had spent the night in the empty throne room, sitting in the dark, staring at the chair where he had once sat with the confidence of a man who believed he was making the right choices. Lyra had come to him once, hovering at the door, her lavender scent timid and uncertain. "Lucius? What's happening?" He had looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. A pretty woman, a kind woman in her limited way, a woman who had been traded like currency by her own pack, used as a political instrument, and then deposited in a dying kingdom with a hollow-eyed king who could not love her. She was not the villain. She was another casualty of his cowardice. "You should pack your things," he said. "I'm sending you home to Silver Creek, with an escort and provisions." "I don't understand." "I know. I'm sorry. For all of it." It was the only honest thing he had said to her in 5 years. She left without another word. Now he walked across the field, the white banner limp in the still morning air. He stopped before Diana's warhorse and looked at his people on the walls. Their faces, the children, gaunt and hollow-eyed, the warriors, loyal beyond reason to a king who had led them to ruin, the elders, and there, at the front of the battlements, Elder Caspian, white-faced and gripping the parapet with both hands, watching his carefully constructed world collapse. Lucius dropped to one knee in the dirt. "I, Lucius Blackwell, former Alpha King of the Blackwood Pack, do hereby surrender my lands, my title, and my people to Queen Diana of the Voss Empire." He unbuckled his sword belt and laid it on the ground. "I swear fealty to you, my queen." A ripple ran through the crowd on the walls. Some wept, some were silent. Some, and this was the part that broke Lucius, looked relieved. Diana dismounted. She did not look at the man kneeling before her. She looked past him, at his people. And when she spoke, her voice carried with a power that settled over the crowd like a warm hand. "People of the Blackwood Pack, you are no longer starving. You are no longer without hope. Today, you become citizens of the Voss Empire. You are mine to protect." A hesitant cheer started among her own troops. It spread, slowly, uncertainly, to the walls. They did not see a conqueror. They saw food, shelter, safety. They saw what their own king had failed to provide. Diana picked up the sword belt Lucius had laid down. She handed it to Ron without ceremony. Then she looked at the man kneeling in the dust. "Rise, Lucius Blackwell." He stood. His eyes were hollow. "You are no longer a king, but you are a capable warrior. You will serve in my legions at a rank earned by merit, not birth. You will be given the same rights and same expectations as every other citizen of this empire." It was not punishment. It was not revenge. It was the cruelest mercy she could have devised: inclusion. He would live inside the empire she had built from his rejection. He would eat at her tables, train in her yards, follow her commands. He would see, every single day, the kingdom that should have been theirs together, functioning beautifully without him. He would be haunted not by her absence, but by her presence. "Yes, my queen," he said. The word queen tasted like ashes in his mouth, but it was the only word she had left him. The transition was swift. Diana's people moved in with practiced efficiency: supply wagons, healers, engineers. Within a week, the Blackwood people were eating 3 meals a day for the first time in 2 years. Within a month, the fields were being replanted under the guidance of Voss agricultural specialists. Within 3 months, the birth rate had begun to climb. Diana took the Great Hall as her regional seat. She sat in the same room where Lucius had rejected her, dispensing justice, hearing petitions, making decisions. The hall, which had felt cold and cavernous under Lucius's hollow reign, seemed to breathe differently with her in it. The power of a true alpha queen, bonded to her wolf, connected to her people, seeped into the stone itself and began to heal the land. Lucius was given a lieutenant's commission under a stern, fair commander named Torres, a former rogue who judged a warrior by his skill and nothing else. He ate in the common mess. He trained with the other soldiers. He followed orders from wolves who had once been outcasts. He did not complain. He did not challenge. He simply served, and in the serving, something began to shift inside him. The arrogance that had been his armor for so long, the certainty that his birth and his power entitled him to rule, it fell away, quietly, in the daily rhythm of drills and duty and eating beside wolves whose stories made his own grievances seem absurd. He met omegas who had been sold by their packs, betas who had been exiled for speaking truth to power, alphas who had lost everything and rebuilt themselves under Diana's banner. Their scars were worse than his. Their suffering had been deeper, and they were not bitter. They were grateful. They were loyal to a queen who had seen their worth when no one else would. He began to understand what Diana had built: not a kingdom, a correction. A world where the measure of a wolf was not the accident of their designation, but the content of their choices. He had spent his entire life inside a system that rewarded birth, power, and dominance, and he had never questioned it because it had rewarded him. Diana had been crushed by that system, and instead of burning it down, she had built something better beside it. The realization did not comfort him. It only deepened the knowledge of what he had lost. He saw her sometimes, in the training yard, sparring with Ron, her movements a blur of lethal grace. In the Great Hall, mediating a dispute between 2 settlements with a patience and wisdom that made the room go still. Walking the battlements at dusk, her silver-streaked hair catching the wind, her face turned toward the rising moon. Each sighting was a knife, a small, precise wound that reminded him of what he had discarded. His wolf watched through his eyes, quiet and mournful. "Ours," it would whisper sometimes, "and we are hers, always." He did not approach her. He had no right. He was a lieutenant in her army, one wolf among thousands, and the only claim he had on her was a broken bond and a memory of his own stupidity. He would serve. He would remember. And he would live with the knowledge that the greatest power in the known world had been standing in front of him in a gray dress, and he had been too blind and too afraid to see it. Epilogue. The Arrangement. 8 months after the absorption, on a night when the first warm winds of spring were pushing the last of winter from the valley, Diana sat on the eastern battlement of Blackwood Castle and watched the moon rise. It was full, heavy, and impossibly bright, the kind of moon that made wolves restless and humans poetic. She sat with her legs dangling over the inner parapet, her armor discarded in her chambers, wearing the soft gray tunic she favored when the day's work was done. Below her, the castle grounds hummed with the quiet life of a thriving settlement. Cookfires, laughter, the distant clang of the blacksmith working late. She heard him before she saw him. Ron never bothered to mask his footsteps around her. He considered stealth dishonest, which, from a man covered in battle scars, was either charming or absurd. He settled beside her on the parapet, his massive frame making the stone groan. He was carrying 2 mugs of something that steamed in the cool air. He handed her one without comment. She took it. Mint tea. He had noticed, somewhere in the 2nd year, that she drank mint tea when she was thinking too hard, and he had never forgotten. They sat in silence for a while, watching the moon climb. This was one of the things she valued most about Ron, his comfort with silence. He did not fill space with words. He did not demand her attention or her energy. He simply existed beside her, a warm, solid, uncomplicated presence in a life that was anything but. "Tora says Blackwell is doing well," Ron said eventually, his voice low and neutral. "I didn't ask." "I know, I'm telling you anyway." He took a sip of his own tea. "He's not the same man. The rank and file respect him. He trains harder than anyone in the unit, doesn't pull rank, doesn't trade on his past. He's becoming someone else." Diana said nothing. She watched the moonlight paint the valley silver. "Does it matter to you?" Ron asked. No jealousy, no agenda. A genuine question from a man who had spent 5 years learning every contour of her silences. She considered the question honestly. She owed him that. She owed him more than that. "It matters the way a scar matters," she said. "It's part of me. It always will be. But it's not bleeding anymore." Ron nodded. He seemed to weigh something internally, a decision he had been carrying for a while. Then he set down his mug. "I have never asked you for anything, Diana." It was true. In 5 years, Ron had never once leveraged his loyalty for personal gain. He had not asked for power, for recognition, for land. He had served. He had built. He had fought beside her and bled for her, and argued with her when she was wrong, and backed her without hesitation when she was right. He had held her shoulders when she'd vomited after executing a traitor, and he had never spoken of it again. He had been, in every way that mattered, the most reliable person in her life. "I know," she said. "I am asking now." He turned to face her. His golden eyes, usually guarded, were open in a way she had never seen. Vulnerable, which was a word she had never associated with a man who could uproot a tree with his bare hands. "I am not your fated mate. I will never be. The bond did not choose me, and I cannot give you what he was supposed to give you. But I can give you what I have, which is 5 years of standing beside you and not once wanting to be anywhere else." Diana's breath caught. Not the violent, magnetic pull of the mate bond, nothing like it. This was quieter, warmer, a hearth, not a lightning strike. The difference, she was beginning to understand, was the difference between being claimed by fate and being chosen by a person. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight," he said, his voice rough. "I'm asking you to consider the possibility that love doesn't have to be a cosmic decree to be real." She looked at him. Really looked, the way she hadn't allowed herself to look in 5 years, because looking meant acknowledging, and acknowledging meant risking, and risking was the thing she had sworn off in a cave during a storm. She saw the scar across his muzzle translated into the crooked line across his jaw, the half-torn ear, the hands that had pulled her back from the edge more times than she could count, the golden eyes that asked nothing and offered everything. Her wolf stirred. Not the frantic, painful lunge of the mate bond, something gentler, a slow, warm recognition, like coming home to a fire that had been lit for you before you knew you were cold. Not the same, her wolf acknowledged, but real. Perhaps more real, because it was built, not bestowed. Diana did not give him an answer that night. She did something better. She leaned into him just slightly, her shoulder pressing against his arm. A small gesture, a tiny breach in the fortress she had built around her heart. Ron went very still. the way a man goes still when he is afraid that moving will break a spell. Then, slowly, he shifted his weight to support hers. His arm came up, not around her shoulders, that would be too much, too fast, and he knew her well enough to know that. But behind her, his hand resting on the stone, a frame she could lean into if she chose. She chose. They sat that way for a long time, watching the moon together, the silence between them full and warm and patient. Below them, the empire she had built hummed with life. Above them, the moon hung heavy and bright, and Diana allowed herself, for the first time in 5 years, to think that maybe the moon goddess had not been cruel after all. Maybe the mate bond had never been the plan. Maybe the plan had always been the breaking and the burning and the building, so that when the right person finally stood beside her, she would know the difference between being claimed and being chosen. On the wall below, in the shadow of a guard tower, a man stood his post and watched the moonlight fall on the woman he had lost. Lucius saw her lean into Ron, a small gesture. Anyone else might have missed it. He didn't. He saw it the way a man dying of thirst sees rain falling into someone else's hands. His wolf stirred, not with hope, not with rage, with a quiet, devastating acceptance. She chose. Not the bond, not destiny. Him. She chose. He closed his eyes. The pain was extraordinary, a clean, bright agony that burned away the last of his delusions. He had spent 5 years believing that the bond entitled him to her, that the cosmic tether between their souls meant she would eventually return. He understood now that the bond had only ever been an invitation. She had accepted it once, open-hearted and trusting, and he had slammed the door in her face. She had rebuilt her life without the bond, without him, and she had found something he had never offered her, a love that was earned, not decreed. He opened his eyes, looked at the moon. It was beautiful and cold and completely indifferent to his suffering. He thought of something Diana had once said to her people, a phrase that had become the unofficial motto of the Voss Empire, repeated in the mess halls and training yards and schools she had built for the unclaimed children. He had heard it 100 times, and only now, standing in the shadow of her happiness, did he understand what it meant. The moon and I have an arrangement. She had made her arrangement, with the moon, with fate, with the shattered pieces of a life that should have destroyed her. She had arranged them into something magnificent, and she had done it without him. Lucius turned away from the moonlight. He walked to his post, adjusted his grip on his spear, and stared out at the dark tree line beyond the walls. He had a duty. A small one, insignificant compared to the kingdom he had once ruled, but it was his, and he would do it well. It was the only thing he had left. Above him, Diana laughed at something Ron said, a low, surprised sound, as if she had forgotten she knew how. It drifted down through the night air, and Lucius caught it, the way a starving man catches the scent of bread from a house that is not his own. He closed his eyes, let the sound wash through him, and let her go. The moon rose higher, the empire slept. And the queen, who had once been a girl in a gray dress with no wolf and no future, leaned against the shoulder of the man who had chosen her, and watched the silver light pour over the kingdom she had built from nothing. She was not the Luna he had wanted. She was the queen she had made herself. And she was, at last, exactly where she belonged.